of these women are incarcerated in MCI Framingham. We're talking about building a prison for 173 women who could all be home with their loved ones. Massachusetts also stands out in regards to levels of sheriff corruption. According to a study just released by Common Cause, Massachusetts has the highest level of 11 studied states of conflict of interest with political donations to sheriffs. That includes donations from construction companies that build jails and prisons, healthcare companies that run in prisons, telecom companies that run in prisons and charge families extortion amounts for phone calls, and legal firms that all have a vested and contractual interest in construction and the maintenance of jails and prisons. It's time to talk about what else we need to invest in. And for that reason, it's my honor to introduce our first panelist, Mahtowin Munro. Mahtowin is Lakota and co-leader of the United American Indians of New England. In addition, Mahtowin founded the statewide Indigenous Peoples Day Coalition and represents the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda, a coalition dedicated to passing Indigenous-centered legislation in Massachusetts. So it's my honor to be able to introduce Mahtowin. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking to you tonight from the traditional and unceded lands of the Massachusetts and Nipmuc people, not far from the beautiful waters of the Quinabaquin, a river that is currently called the Charles River. All of us on this webinar are located on someone's traditional and unceded lands, whether Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Mohican, Nauset, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, Pocumtuck, Stockbridge, Munsee, or other peoples. When acknowledging the land and the people who continue to live on and caretake it, it is important to have in mind that there needs to be an accompanying commitment to uphold Indigenous sovereignty and rights and to be more accountable to the land and water. I want to start tonight by expressing my solidarity with the hunger striker prisoners at Rikers Island and others behind the walls who risked their lives to bring the horrific conditions of their detention to the attention of the public. And I ask that everyone listening tonight take steps to listen and learn more about the prison conditions right here in Massachusetts as well. You know, I drive past MCI Framingham several times a week. It was built in 1877. Ulysses S. Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes were the presidents that year back in 1877. What? That's crazy. So it's obviously really old, but while repairs may need to be made in the short term and the long term, building a new prison is not going to change what needs to be changed at all. Massachusetts passed a law in 2014 to end the practice of shackling women giving birth. Yet prisons and jails continued to restrain pregnant women after that. Women prisoners in Massachusetts continue to be denied their full rights to reproductive care, and visitation with families, and especially with their children, can be very difficult. Rodents, bad water, and abuse by guards abound at MCI Shirley and other prisons in the state. Inadequate health care and a lack of protection from COVID has been the norm. Sometimes non-Native people might seem a little surprised that prisons are an important issue to Indigenous peoples too, but all too many of us are impacted by prisons and jails personally and in our families. And like Black and Latino communities, over-incarceration of Indigenous people is a weapon used against us. Native Americans constitute more than 2% of the federal prison population, since the US government is involved in criminal justice enforcement on reservations. Yet Native people are less than 1% of the total US population. Federal imprisonment can often make it very hard for the prisoners to have visits with their families or retain ties to their communities, since they may be in institutions on the other side of the country. State systems can do this as well. For instance, many Native Hawaiian people have been sent by Hawaii to a private prison all the way in Arizona. Government data publications that break down incarcerated populations by race or ethnicity often omit Native people or put them into this meaningless other category. So the data that we have likely reflects lower numbers than actually exist. In jails, Native people have more than double the incarceration rate of white people, and in prisons, this disparity is much greater. Nationally, Native people are incarcerated at a rate that's 38% higher than the US average for all groups. In 19 states, Native people are overrepresented in the prison population more than anyone else. Native women are particularly overrepresented, with numbers 3 or 4 times their percentage in the US population. The confinement of Native youth is a crisis as well. There are rampant racial disparities in how Native youth are treated by the juvenile and criminal justice systems. Their confinement rates are second only to those of Black youth and certainly exceed those of white, Latino, and Asian youth combined. Forces that contribute to this disparity include disproportionate arrest rates of Native youth for certain offense types, the school to prison pipeline, and harsher outcomes for court-involved youth. Native youth are deeply impacted by the school to prison pipeline and are subject to being over-disciplined in many school districts as well. They're also more likely to be in federal custody than any other youth. And when I think about the impact of incarceration on Indigenous people, I also have in mind ICE detainees, because many of them are Indigenous people from Latin America. In Canada, Indigenous people comprise about 5 to 6% of the overall population, but make up more than 30% of prisoners. Indigenous women there comprise nearly 50% of the federal prison population for women. In addition to all the other issues faced by Indigenous prisoners, the spiritual practices of Indigenous prisoners are often not respected, and many systems make it difficult for Indigenous prisoners to be able to participate in ceremonies. Now, we are mostly taught to think that jails and prisons and certain notions of crime and punishment have always been with us, and that locking up people is natural. These ideas are such an embedded part of the dominant society where we live. Courts and prosecutions are part of an adversarial system focused on winning and losing, as though it is a football game rather than people's lives at stake. But the root causes are not addressed by the current dysfunctional systems, nor are people who are imprisoned given opportunities to change the direction of their lives. It is impossible to escape the belief that these systems are intended to crush prisoners and their families and their communities. As we know, prisoners are subject to all levels of abuse inside prison and stigmatized on the outside. But things don't have to be this way. There was no such thing as a jail or prison in Massachusetts before the English showed up. As a matter of fact, the earliest English jails in Massachusetts were often used to hold Native people who were accused of a crime by the English or were considered to be troublemakers. Now, I sadly realize that some of you might think of Indigenous people as being somewhat unsophisticated and primitive, because that's largely what you might have been taught in school or seen in the media. And that would be wrong. Native people for millennia have had community laws and ways of dealing with people who did not respect the community laws. Many tribes have a long history of what are now called restorative justice models. The underlying beliefs of restorative justice are: 1, we are in relation with each other, and 2, we are responsible for each other. In relation with each other and responsible for each other. Contrast that with how the Puritans and others who came here from Europe permanently marked people as offenders and cast them out. Unfortunately, our traditional Indigenous justice systems were disrupted by colonization and the insistence of the federal government that Indigenous justice systems had to follow the white ways. but many tribal nations have been working to return to traditional justice ways. I hope that this jail and prison construction moratorium bill will pass and that people will sit down and take some time to think about how things can be done in a much better way. Sometimes when things are not working and the current so-called justice system is truly not working, taking a break to reflect can be very helpful. We can all think about how money should be spent on human needs rather than maintaining the prison industrial complex that is alive and well in Massachusetts. We can look at restorative justice and other models that can be used in many communities. We must invest in meaningful solutions, such as ways of restoring victims, offenders, and communities. And we also need to use money to bolster education, child benefits, housing, healthcare, employment opportunities, cultural opportunities and connections, substance abuse and mental health treatment, employment programs and long-term jobs with decent wages for everyone, including people being released from prison. Together, we can envision a world where people's needs are met and where the torment of our imprisoned relatives can stop. Finally, since we are talking about legislation tonight, I did want to end with asking you all to find ways to support the 5 Indigenous-centered bills that we currently have at the State House. I have to shout out State Senator Comerford on this panel, who has been a staunch supporter of Indigenous issues, including this legislation. The proposed bills will ban Native American mascots, establish a statewide Indigenous Peoples Day, improve Native educational outcomes, protect sacred Native heritage, and celebrate and teach Native curriculum in the public schools statewide. 4 of these bills need to be voted favorably out of committee before a February 2nd deadline, so we're running out of time. Please go to maindigenousagenda.org to get more information and send an automated email to legislators urging them to move forward on these bills. Wopila, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahtowin. So important to realize that often we talk about needing to create new alternatives for accountability, but they're not new at all, right? That these systems already exist, they have existed, and they will exist after prisons. Thank you so much for that. And I also really appreciate thinking about the intersectionality of struggles and mentioning the other bills that we need to support at the same time as this one. It's next my honor to introduce Representative China Tyler. China Tyler was born and raised in Roxbury. After earning her Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in Law, Policy, and Society from Northeastern University, she began her career as a case manager for federal inmates, assisting those nearing release with securing employment, housing, and community support. From that experience, she grew to understand the importance of state government in delivering valuable resources to the most vulnerable populations. In 2016, at just 26 years old, Tyler ran a successful campaign to succeed a longtime incumbent for the Massachusetts House of Representatives, representing the 7th Suffolk District. She's currently serving her 2nd term as Massachusetts State Representative and is the Vice Chair of the Public Health Committee and the Chair of the Boston Delegation. Representative Tyler, thanks so much for being here.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. And I hope no one does the math on my age these days. It's been a long road, but I'm really grateful to be here this afternoon. And again, good evening. My name is China Tyler. I'm a state representative of the 7th Suffolk District. And this is my 3rd term, and I'm vice chairing the Judiciary Committee this year, as well as the honor of actually being the chairwoman of the Massachusetts Black and Latino Caucus. And I'm here today to first start off by thanking you all for your fearless partnership in the fight for freeing women. This legislative session is very intense, but I have the great honor to legislate alongside my colleagues in efforts to recover from some of the Commonwealth's biggest deficits. This year, one big issue that arose was that the state was moving to spend money, which is normally okay for us. Yet a red flag arose when we learned that the purpose of these funds were to build a new prison. Senator Comerford and I met with many of the sponsors here, including Families for Justice's Healing, and we instantly filed an act establishing the jail and prison moratorium, which is House Bill for Me 1905. We didn't hesitate to do that, just first and foremost. And the passing of this bill is important to me because as a child, I have had family members who were affected by incarceration. And today I represent one of the most incarcerated corridors here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I have had the opportunity to visit the women's facility here in Massachusetts and have witnessed how uninhabitable the environment really is and how disproportionately impacted Black and brown people and people of color are in general. Research actually shows that women in jails and prisons are more likely to suffer from mental health problems and experience psychological distress. Female inmates are more likely to be subject to physical abuse and sexual abuse, along with suffering from emotional and behavioral disorders compared to male inmates, and that is honestly unacceptable. On average, women are the sole caregivers of their children before entering incarceration, so the effects of incarceration would leave a child without a parent figure. And as a single mom to an amazing 10-year-old daughter, that really hurts me and is very heartbreaking. The passing of this bill will place a 5-year moratorium on any prisons built in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And this bill will allow for our state to address the root causes of incarceration alongside addressing alternative solutions like something that we are all familiar with, better programming amongst many others. So the bottom line today here is, folks, passing this bill would allow us to redirect these funds and invest in people and strengthen our communities and not invest our hard-earned tax dollars in the continued disenfranchisement of our people. My office, alongside with Senator Comerford's office, has followed this issue very closely and on top of it. And we are currently awaiting the release of the strategic plan conducted by the Ripples Group on whether or not they think a new facility should be built. But regardless of the findings of that strategic plan, Senator Comerford and I were going to remain strong and remain steadfast on the rejection of the construction of a new facility. So in closing, I'd actually like to share some amazing news from the legislature today, and that is that this bill has been reported favorably out of one of our committees and is moving forward. So please, in closing of this event, make sure you celebrate because we are doing the job. I'd like to thank you all for your time and investment on this cause. And I would like to call on you to ensure that your state rep and your senator and any other elected officials in your immediate geographic location or where you live and near your home is supportive of this bill. And we look forward to passing this bill. And again, please make sure that you support this bill and not establishing a jail and prison construction moratorium. Thank you so much. And I look forward to working with you all to make sure we get it done. Hopefully we can celebrate this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Tyler. So important to remember the connections in the ways that families would be impacted by a new prison. And what amazing news out of committee. Woohoo! That was a great punchline there at the end. That's really amazing news and a great sign for this bill. A lot of bills don't make it to that point, so it's really exciting. And we'll drive our momentum forward, including into hearing from Senator Joe Comerford. Joe Comerford has lived and worked in Western Massachusetts since the late 1990s, arriving fresh out of New York City's Hunter College School of Social Work, where she focused on homelessness policy, prison reform, and earned an MSW. In the region, Joe led a crisis intervention outreach team through the Center for Human Development, focused on creating a high-impact team capable of addressing the myriad and often intersecting root causes of crisis. She then organized for 7 years as the director of Western Massachusetts American Friends Service Committee, moving to direct the programs of the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, where she worked to meet the immediate demands of hunger and launched a pilot program to reduce food insecurity in the region. After the food bank, Joe led National Priorities Project, a national budget and tax priorities research organization, as its executive director. NPP garnered a Nobel Peace Prize nomination in Joe's final year. After NPP, Joe was a campaign director for Move On, focusing on a range of issues from gun safety to healthcare. Now it's my honor to introduce Senator Joe Comerford.
Well, thank you so much for that really generous introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be with you. I want to start by saying thank you Thank you to Families for Justice's Healing. Thank you to National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, Black and Pink Massachusetts, the Building Up People Not Prisons Coalition, Justice for Housing, New Beginnings Reentry Service, and hundreds of other organizations and individuals that have signed on to support this really exquisite bill. I want to just send big love to my steadfast partner in the House, Rep. Tyler, who just gave you so much good news. I'm going to try not to duplicate her terrific remarks. And I just want to say I'm so honored to be here with Mahtowin and Andrea and all of you. I also want to just tip my hat to Senator Eldridge and all in the Senate who are with us. I get to carry this bill, again, an unbelievable honor, but there are lots of people in the Senate and the House, of course, who are behind this. I'm really grateful to the organizers of tonight's forum and all of you who are here, and grateful, so grateful that we're envisioning the world that Mahtowin has called us into during your beautiful remarks. The people power driving this movement for no new prisons and jails is really unstoppable. And you're having an impact. As Rep. Tyler just said, it is not a fait accompli that the State Administration Committee would send out this bill favorably, not, so passing an enormous hurdle. And you've helped clear this hurdle with grace and grit and tenacity and courage. So, as I said, filing this bill and fighting for it is just such a deep honor. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my Aunt Joan, who was a remarkable warrior for peace and justice. She's now passed, but at the time she was a nun living with a bunch of other badass nuns in a convent on J Street in Brooklyn. And their life's work was to bust open punitive New York State sentencing laws and make the case for alternatives to incarceration, for community investment and after incarceration support, and not prisons. Now, this was like 100 years ago. It was really just the 1970s when I was 10, 11, 12, and experiencing the kind of fight that they were having at the time. And fast forward to the late 90s, I was getting my master's in social work, as you heard, when I began to work with Justice Works on a campaign called Mothers in Prison, Children in Crisis, which called attention to the disproportionate impact of incarceration on women and girls. And Rep. Tyler and Mahtowin said this beautifully. That work brought me to Massachusetts, and I loved the people and the spirit. I stayed and became an organizer for the American Friends Service Committee, where I joined forces with the Rise for Social Justice and so many other incredible individuals and groups to try to block the construction of a new women's jail in Chicopee. We lost that fight, but we didn't give up. You didn't give up. And in so many ways, working on this bill now with all of you is like coming home to a family of organizers who fight for what's right and never give up. And that's good, because while we're gaining steam, we're not over the finish line. So as Rep. Tyler said, we know a strategic plan for women's incarceration in Massachusetts hasn't been released yet, but it's coming. And while we don't know what's in that report, we do know that regardless of what it says, we need to pass this bill into law to ensure no new prison construction or expansion. So we're going to need every bit of spirit we have collectively to win. The State House works when people make it work. The best policy is forged by human organizing, by people like you, by events like tonight that galvanize our spirit and set us all forward with this piercing collective action that will help move a legislature with lots of other priorities and lots of other things happening in the middle of a pandemic, but it will help push this issue to the top of the pile. And when we win, and we will win, it will not only be a strong statement in opposition to mass incarceration, it will be a massive public acknowledgement that the tens of millions of dollars anticipated for a new facility must be so much better spent, as people have said, in our communities, on alternatives, on after incarceration support, and the real tangible economic justice efforts directed toward those who have been disproportionately marginalized, disproportionately imprisoned in the Commonwealth. And this victory is going to belong to the organizers driving this movement and people like you who are joining and right at the right moment to push us over the line. So thanks so much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Comerford, Joe, for your comments. It's so important to think about how all of our roles fit in here. We all have a different way that we connect to this issue, and we all have different aspects that we can do to push this issue forward and make sure that this moratorium is passed. Really appreciate that. I also want to recognize we have some other representatives in the House. So I just want to recognize Erica Eiderhoven, Representative Eiderhoven for being here, as well as Governor Councilor Paul DePaulo and Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, also running for governor. So we've got a lot of political power in the House. We really appreciate you being here. It is now my honor to be able to introduce personal hero of mine, Andrea James. Andrea James, JD, is the founder and executive director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, founder of Families for Justice as Healing, author of Upper Bunkies Unite and Other Thoughts on the Politics of Mass Incarceration, a 2015 Soros Justice Fellow, and recipient of the 2016 Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. As a former criminal defense attorney and a formerly incarcerated woman, Andrea shares her personal and professional experiences to raise awareness of the effect of incarceration on women themselves, their children, and their communities. Her work is focused on ending the incarceration of women and girls and contributing to the shift from a criminal legal system focused on police and prisons to a system led by directly affected people from within their communities and based on individual and community accountability. Andrea, we can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you, everybody. It's really absolutely amazing to be here tonight. I got to tell you, I want to first say thank you to Senator Joe for coming out the gate, really, with full support of this. I also want to give a real special shout out to my state representative because this is personal. Rep. Tyler, I want to just tell you how proud we are of you. I want to share with you how important it is for us. You mentioned in your opening that you represent the most incarcerated and were born and raised in the most incarcerated Commonwealth corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's my neighborhood too. I'm sitting in a house right now. We were both raised in the same neighborhood. I'm much older than you, which gives me all the authority to say how proud I am of you. But I want to just let people know right out the gate that this is personal. When you talk about building a new women's prison in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you're talking about the fifth generation of my family, 2 beautiful grandbabies. You're talking about all of these families around us that also grew up in this neighborhood with me and Rep. Tyler and so many other people. That you're saying that when we're thinking down the road, 10 years, 20 years down the road, who is going to be in that prison? Well, look at who's in that prison now. Look at the places and the communities and the neighborhoods that they come from. That is not going to change. They're going to be filled. Those beds are going to be filled with the same people from the same communities. And we're talking about a women's prison. So you're talking now about our generations, and we shall not have that. We shall not have it. I just wanted to share that piece of you of how personal this struggle is. I come to this work from a really unique position that many people don't have. A lot of people have a piece of this or a piece of that, but I actually grew up in this neighborhood in Roxbury, so proud of that, born and raised. 5 generations again from a family living in the same house on the same street in the most incarcerated corridor. I grew up to be a criminal defense attorney. My grandmother broke the color barrier for Black nurses in the city at Boston City Hospital. My uncle was one of the first tenured law professors at UCLA. My aunt was one of the first lead Black pediatricians in LA County. I say all this, my parents are educators, activists, and researchers of people of African diaspora. And I tell you all this because this means something to us on a very personal level. But what it also did for me growing up is it poured into me social justice. It poured into me about the work to bring equity to all neighborhoods, to all communities. And we've seen a level of austerity in that over the past just 25 years that we've done a budget look back at Families for Justice's Healing. It's no surprise that we are the most incarcerated corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so I also became a criminal defense attorney. I did some real estate conveyance work, and I got in trouble as a real estate conveyance lawyer. As a younger Black woman lawyer, I was afraid to tell anybody. And I ended up doing some things that I deeply still regret to this day, that I did to try and cover up and to fix things without having to disclose to anybody as this young Black female lawyer that I had made a mistake. I was too afraid to share that. And I ended up serving. That happened back in 2006. By 2010, I had been sentenced to serve a 24-month prison sentence. Now, remember, I grew up in this community in Roxbury. I have all of that experience of being a child like Rep. Tyler, growing up a Black girl in this neighborhood. I grew up in a family steeped in the rich tradition and history of social justice. I became a criminal defense attorney, and now then I became an incarcerated woman. So when I tell you that I step into this space and speak to what I believe is speaking truth to power, to say that the last thing we need is a new women's prison, I speak to you from places of experience that very few people have had the alchemy of all of those experiences to come together. And I assure you, I was a criminal justice professional my entire adult life. That's all I ever did. And I assure you, I didn't think there was anything more that anybody could tell me about how much this system needed to be dismantled and new things need to be breathed into the life of supporting the most vulnerable among us until I became an incarcerated woman. I was 45 years old when I went to prison. I had privilege. I had an education. I came from a family that was intact. I have a husband. I have beautiful children. I have parents, both still alive, 92 and 88 years old. And I had an education. I didn't have to worry about where my children were going to go when I went to prison. I didn't have to worry about where I was going to live when I came back home. And these things do matter. And it wasn't until I became an incarcerated woman that I really began to understand the mistakes that we have made as a country. We talk a lot about the separation of mothers from children with the struggle around immigration, which we should. We should all be standing on the front lines talking about ending separation of children. But you know what? We do that in this country every single day. Every single day we separate mothers from their children under this guise of public safety, under this guise of correcting wrongs. And I just want to say to you that we know for sure, I know for sure, as somebody has had all of these other life experiences and didn't think as a criminal justice professional that anybody could tell me how the system needed to change until I became an incarcerated woman and saw for myself. And so the notion of us spending $50 million to build a new women's prison when we were already, after 10 years, we have been organizing to end incarceration of women and girls in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for 10 years. We have been doing the participatory research. We have been grappling with the hard questions. We have been looking at what different looks like. We have had countless convenings, town hall meetings, meetings behind the wall, prison meetings, phone calls, meetings around the country, in addition to the countless participatory research projects we've done here in Boston and in Massachusetts to figure out what different looks like. And we know for sure we've come out with 3 buckets that we know before we even think about building a new women's prison. We need to use these 3 buckets of policy, of hyperlocal organizing that we call reimagining communities, and of our campaign to close Framingham, do individual exit plans for each of those women to figure out what different looks like. I want to just say this, and I know I'm short on my time, and I have so much to say to you, but I want to just piece this together for you a little bit to think about. One thing that we know, and we don't put the scrutiny under, if we put the current prison system under scrutiny, it's a failed system. And we're not ever doing that, but we're challenging us when we say, let's work on what different looks like. We are uniquely poised in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to do this. We have one of the lowest incarceration populations of women. We have the brilliance. We have the academia. We have the researchers. We have the Susan Sareds of the world. We have Elizabeth Wiley of the world. We have all of these people who have come together to figure this out. For 135 to 150 women, wherever you are and whatever month or date that you're counting, women who are currently sitting in our state prison, who we can do something better on behalf of. And we have all of those ideas. Stacey Borden is on here. She has created an incredible model of what transitional housing and alternative housing could look like. But I just want to share with you that we don't have to build a new prison. We don't have to have a prison at all. We can figure this out. We have figured this out. And we need to take that $50 million that somehow we said it was okay to spend taxpayer money, bond revenue, to build a new women's prison and find the political will to reallocate, find somewhere else $50 million to invest in the ideas and the projects and the communities, because prisons don't create healthy people. Prisons don't create thriving communities. The work that we are doing in reimagining communities is what stops harm, is what stops people causing harm to other people. It's what stops poverty. That's what changes things, not prisons. And so recognizing that accountability is different from punishment. How do we get there? Accountability is different from punishment. And we can all be held accountable for the harm that we cause without using the just abject position of prison, because it's ineffective. It doesn't work. And so let's think bigger. We're smarter than this. We have 10 years, phenomenal organizers. Mallory Honora, one of the most phenomenal boots on the ground organizers. We've got brilliant people. We have representatives that Black women like myself fought for years to see a representative like China Tyler from our neighborhood, from our families, with incarcerated loved ones, who knows firsthand what we're talking about. We want to salute and say thank you to Senator Chang Diaz. We've passed some things in this state. We ended the shackling of pregnant incarcerated women during labor and delivery. Can you imagine that? We thought that was okay. And up till 2014, we passed the primary caretaker legislation. Give us a moment to pause. It's only 5 years to help us breathe a minute, stop having to come back every single legislative session to fight a new women's jail or a new women's prison, to help us put in place some of these pieces and to actually implement some of the things that have already been passed that were part of that omnibus bill. We can do this, and we can demonstrate for the, not only us, for the entire country, what different looks like. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Andrea. That's wonderful. I could listen to you talk all day, and you do have more time if anybody wants to add in more, and we have lots more to go in the program. So we know we need to work on what different looks like, and that is what this bill will do. I mentioned earlier that we all need to figure out what our roles are in this and how we can push, right? Well, the opportunity is here sooner than you'd think. I want to thank our speakers, each one of you, so much, and push us now all in here to our first call to action. We're going to call our representatives right now in this moment. We're all going to do it. My phone's right here. Your phone is nearby, hopefully. And so we have these three senators and representatives that's really important that we focus in on, especially hearing now that the bill has moved out of one committee. That is crucially important. So we have these three senators and representatives that we know it's really important that they understand how popular this bill is and where the will of the people lies. So we're going to take just 5 minutes right now, and we get to see everyone on Zoom actually doing it. And we have a script for you here to call. If you'd rather not call, someone is also going to put in the chat a link to different tweets that you could send at your representatives or at these representatives. So look out for that link if you would rather tweet. Otherwise, we're going to take 5 minutes and make these phone calls following the script. Can't wait to hear how it went. Feel free to put in the chat after you make your call how it went. I can reassure you that because it's after hours, this is the safe way to do this. No one's going to answer, most likely. No one will answer. And so you're going to get to leave this on a voicemail, and they'll arrive in tomorrow morning on a Friday to so many voicemails from us. We can't wait to till that happens. So let's take 5 minutes and make some phone calls. Thank you so much. Oh, true. Also, don't go away. So we'll make the phone calls, and then we're going to come back and have question and answer with our panelists. Thanks so much. Thank you so much, everyone. A busy signal is a great sign. I got that for Senator Spilka as well. Loving seeing the messages in the chat. Thank you so much for these phone calls. Really great. I also want to thank Representative Steve Owens for being here. I hope that he's still here. He's actually one of my representatives from Watertown. So it's really great that he is here. Okay, so up next, we have a little bit of an intermission. Just a 5-minute intermission. And while this intermission happens, I hope you're thinking of great questions for the Q&A and sending those in, please. And then also we're going to send you some links in the chat for volunteer opportunities with our campaign. This is a really crucially important couple weeks we have coming up. And so during the break, I hope you can reflect again on your role in this and where you have time and where you can push with us to make sure that this bill passes and the prison does not get built. And so look at those volunteer opportunities in the chat, please. Consider your role during the break, and we will come back in just a few minutes with Q&A. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much. I'm seeing in the chat that we filled Senator Spilka's voicemail. So that's wonderful. That's great. What a way to start tomorrow she'll have. Francis just put in the chat another opportunity for you to click on this link. So let's actually take a minute and click on that link to figure out ways to get more involved with the campaign. So you'll see that link from Francis. Please click on that before we get started with Q&A. Loved reading the messages about how well everyone's phone calls went, and especially the ones about how now you've done it for the first time for some of you, and the numbers are saved, so you can do it again. That's wonderful. And now it is time for the Q&A with our panelists. Can't wait for this. So the first question that I have for the panelists from the chat is, does the bill itself contain language that redirects funds to programs that would benefit incarcerated people? Does the bill detail the alternative ways to spend the $50 million?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
That's a great question, and thank you so much to the individual who asked. The bill is simply focused on just the moratorium. The bill does not go into those aspects of redirecting the funds. However, that is the work of this working group to be able to figure out how we want to redirect those funds. And I also wanted to say hello to Andrea and kudos to her organization, because they have been doing a lot of amazing research around other ways that we can kind of help folks rehabilitate. So I encourage you all to check out their research and check out their work, because it's really speaks towards this message today.
Can I just add something to that really quickly, so folks can really be thinking about some things as well around that. This was kind of like an emergency response for us. This was what we had to do to stop this steamroller from coming. I mean, we have been standing outside of HDR, which is a national prison building architectural designer, architectural prison designer. We stood out there for months. We did everything that we could to put a pause and to have conversations about this and to include what different could look like. Then I think it was now, to get me straight, $250,000 for a report that we're waiting for the results of. I mean, the efforts that we don't understand why a state with all of the questions and all of the support we were getting and asking for support around getting answers with zero transparency from DOC, from EOPS, from anybody, why this was going forward. And so we had to do something. And so the thing to do was what Rep. Tyler and Senator Joe stepped up to do, was to sponsor a bill that says, hold it, let's do something that can put the brakes on this so that we can begin to answer some of these very important questions before we build another prison.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Relatedly, another question. A few people asked this question. Now that the bill has been voted favorably out of certain committees, what's the most helpful request to make of our legislators? What's the most helpful request?
It's a great question. Rep. Tyler, I'll jump in, and Andrea, I'll jump in if it's okay, and answer this one. You guys pile on. So like we're all saying, this is a good big hurdle, right? There are 6,000 plus bills filed every session in the legislature, and not all of them make it out of committee. And different legislative sessions have different percentages of bills that move, but again, not all move. Sometimes it's quite a slim percentage of bills that actually get out. So right now it's on its way to a destination committee. We don't have that. We don't have that necessarily locked in. There was a message on social that said it was going to House Ways and Means. The representative and I think it's going to Senate Ways and Means, but we have to confirm that, and the website's not updated. So that's just a little bit of like legislative labyrinth things that the representative and I will track down. But what you can say and do is what you did tonight, which is speak to leadership in both the House and the Senate and say, we need to bring this bill to the floor. So after a bill gets out of committee, it goes to a destination committee. Again, we'll find out where it is. We think it's going to be Senate Ways and Means. We'll confirm with Andrea and crew. And then from there, it could move to the Senate floor. Or it could, Rep. Tyler's bill could go to its destination committee and move from the House floor. Regardless of whether the Senate passes or the House passes, the other branch has to also pass it. So we need both chambers to feel the burn to bring this to the floor to get it passed. And so that's your ask right now. Get this bill to the floor. As folks know, we are in a 2-year legislative session. So beginning in 2022, we're on the fast road to the end. We're in the 2nd year of this current legislative session. And if we don't get it past this session, we'd have to start all over again. And who knows if this would be the right bill to file, and organizers and advocates would say what's best, but we need this to pass now, so that it interrupts any kind of movement the state may make. So the ask is bring this bill to the floor. And if you're calling Senate President Spilka or Speaker Mariano, that's the good ask. If you're calling your state representative or state senator, you can say either thanks for being on the bill. If they're on the bill, ask for this to be brought to the floor, or hey, could you get on this bill, and ask for it to be brought to the floor.
Great, thank you so much. Does anyone want to add to that, or should I do the next question? Cool, will do. Aside from the women's prison, are there any plans announced for building or expanding other prisons in the Commonwealth? Where is planning announced? And how would the moratorium impact them, if at all?
We're like nodding at each other, like, go
I know.
ahead.
I mean, there's no transparency. It's part of the problem, first of all. I mean, at the time that this was announced, I was sitting as a member of the governor's commission or plan women's justice panel. Rep. Tyler was on that panel with me. We were tasked with the responsibility of figuring out what is the best things that we should be investing in and thinking about regarding women and incarceration. For us, it was like, you can't start from you want women to stay in an old prison or you want women to stay in a new prison, because we were tasked with what was best for them. And so we relied on Professor Sered, the people like Norma Wasso, people who have been working on this for decades, researching and looking at women in incarceration. And so we just thought that we were being placed into this box of stay in an old prison or a new prison. That's not even the question. The question is what else? And so the part of the problem with that is, even when we were positioned to contribute in meaningful ways as experts, we weren't met with transparency. And so to answer a question on whether or not there are other prisons that are slated for being built, I don't honestly know. I don't know if our representatives have any more information than we do, but it's not something that the Commonwealth has been forthcoming with information about. It's kind of like just, it jumps out at you. And then we have to get into this tangle in this fight to try and put the brakes on it. So I don't know if anybody else knows of more intel, but.
Andrea, this is Joe. I have no more intel other than what we're grappling with the women's prison. And as you know, the report and the surveys and, all of the kind of churn that's been at the state level, although I agree, not transparent, but that you've been grappling with and others have been grappling with, and this bill tries to address directly.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I agree. I just want to also encourage folks to check out the language of the bill if you haven't already. And it encompasses all penal institutions, not just women's facilities over men's facilities. So it does cover a wide variety of types of penal institutions.
I just want to raise up Austin, part of our whole team here, just reminded us that there have been all of this floating information about sheriffs making bids for new jail construction in different parts of the Commonwealth. Not sure where that is going, but we don't need a new jail anywhere. We need to put a pause on this and figure out what different looks like before we make any moves to and make any investment in a jail or a prison. And so we're uniquely poised again to do this here in Massachusetts, and we should be a leader in this space of what different looks like.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. A question we've gotten quite a few times, and a question I know that Andrea certainly has heard before, is the moratorium doesn't stop any maintenance on current prisons, correct? Does the bill include repairs of buildings, facilities, and infrastructure that are falling apart, and such as getting rid of mold and making sure people have clean running water, et cetera?
Yeah, the reps can speak to that, but the senator and rep, but the bill does not preclude making repairs. It just doesn't. We've even volunteered to go into the women's prison like we had to do. I lived in an old prison. I understand acutely what this is. Like no heat in the winter, blisteringly hot in the summer. The prison that I lived in is Danbury, Connecticut Federal Prison. It was all women at the time, but by that time in 2010, it had been flip-flopped back and forth for decades back and forth. It was the part of the prison I was housed in was created for 8 of the Watergate 8. They had in just that section of the prison over 250 women. We lived in a basement with tiers of room above us that had foreign stuff dripping on our bunks at night during the day when we were out at work. We were the labor of the prison. The prison was old. It was full of mold. We all got all kinds of skin disorders. We had infections. I came home from prison with a bacterial infection that required me to be on 2 antibiotics simultaneously, which God only knows what other damage it may have caused to other organs in my body. But that was the significance. People were always sick. It was a horrible existence. The sewage would back up because you can't build something for 8 men and have 250 women that are forced to make that a place to live in and not expect that the sewage is not going to constantly back up. I mean, I know what it's like firsthand to live in a very old, terrible, inhabitable place. We're not doing this because we're not aware of what women in Framingham have to endure. But my God, we have women in Framingham who have dementia. We have women in Framingham who aren't even sure why they're there or who they are. We have women who are in terminal states of illness. We have elderly women in Framingham that under anybody's definition aren't a threat to any public safety anywhere. Yes. We have to decarcerate first. We have to pause, pump the brakes to do that real work. And we know how to do it and bring women home first and create what different looks like first for those that we can immediately bring home. And then work on what different looks like for everybody. But we can do this. And we understand we're not asking for something that we haven't lived through ourselves. Living conditions that are absolutely deplorable. And no, this bill does not preclude renovations.
And I just want to raise up something that was put in the chat also, which is that census, because there's a question about, would people need to be sent to other states, right? In addition to what Andrea just said, in terms of we need a pause and we need to decarcerate to move people out of prisons who don't need to be there any longer. But the census population has been dropping. And so there is space. There's space in jails across the Commonwealth. There's space in prisons. So we are not at a tipping crisis, which makes this the right, not only the right moral and ethical moment, but also the right, political, fiscal, social moment to do this, to put a pause and to rethink incarceration entirely.
Yeah, and if I could just give a closing remark on that one, I agree. And one thing that we are very familiar with is the conditions. We get very high call volumes of constituents and families that may be on this call of concerns that their loved ones are facing that are currently incarcerated. Recently, we dealt with a really big water issue out in Walpole, where their water was brown. Some of the facilities like Susan Baranowski, they had a flood there after a big riot last year. So we are very familiar with some of the inhabitable issues that are going on in the facilities, and work and are dedicated every day to working hard to, addressing them. But long term, we hope to be able to pass this bill and do many more actual hard reforms to be able to make sure that folks are on a pathway home and are able to be home and not reoffend.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. We have a question saying, can you give an update on what the DOC is doing right now that is going ahead despite this bill being considered? What plans are there for the rehab of a current building that would still result in a new prison?
There's a study currently, Rep. Tyler mentioned it, by the Ripples Group. And Andrea, I think, put the price tag on it at something like, I think it's 250,000. I think that you're correct, maybe 275, but I think it's 250. So the state is going forward with that study. Lots of people have intervened, to try to reach the Ripples Group, to try to reach DCAM, to try to reach DOC. And so the wait for that study is ongoing. We hear it's coming soon. I don't have visibility into what's in it, but I do know that some colleagues in the House and the Senate are engaged in conversations with DOC, and I think this movement has had an impact. I will say, I think DOC and legislative leadership and the executive branch has heard you. And so I think things are in flux. That's why I think it's the moment to strike, because the report may very well come out saying we need a new women's prison. But it doesn't mean that that's going to be the thing that happens. And it's not because of the actions, because of this bill, because of the history of organizing that so many have on this call, and because of this moment, we will keep pushing forward no matter what.
Great, thank you so much. All right, our next question. Are there any sheriffs or police chiefs who publicly support this?
Not that I'm aware of, but if we do find out, we will definitely let you know, but not that I'm aware of at the moment.
Absolutely. Also, Mahtowin, someone gave a comment in the chat that said, would you consider sending your comments to the Globe? Such a great perspective, one not enough people here. There were also other questions about whether or not we can share the slides and the script in the chat for everyone to be shared later, and we can definitely send that out later. Let's see. What do you think having a Democratic governor? Do you think that that might help with these issues in legislation?
I want to answer that. So I don't think that we can take for granted that because we're in a particular party that label as a Democrat is going to guarantee the change that we need to see. Because, we have people who are in the Democratic Party who are lawmakers now who don't support some of the work that we're calling for. They don't understand it, or they're just thinking of other things. But I think that what we have to do as people is to really think about these issues. And it's up to us to to elect people into seats that actually hear what the people are asking for and make those things happen. And you know, that is what needs to be telling right now. Who is willing to step up, whether you're running for office, you're running to keep your seat, whatever you're doing, who will really hear out and respect and recognize the work, the years of work that have gone into what could be a really great shift in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so it's not enough anymore to just say, we're a Democrat. I'm a Democrat. We couldn't get voting rights moved in this country. I mean, there are appalling things happening in this country that just, you know, aren't happening for a lot of different reasons. And there are people in both parties that support and don't support things. So people have to be, and I encourage anybody who's running for office right now to really be very clear about where you stand on this issue. Be really very clear, because we are organizing in the communities that people are considered to be zero propensity voters. We're organizing in those places. And people really want to see that the people that we're electing into these seats actually care about the issues that affect all of us, not just the people who are fortunate enough or wealthy enough or positioned enough to appear or are politicized enough to come onto a forum and to hear a conversation about this. There's a lot of people that are really suffering and struggling in the Commonwealth right now. And those people are mobilizing and organizing themselves. And I think that people who are in office or are running for office are going to be a little surprised about how people come down on who they decide to vote for, because they need change. People need change right now. And this is a really, actually easy change for us. It's a really easy change. It's the will. Do we have the will to do it is the only thing standing in our way. It's the only thing that makes sense. I just want to say something else really quickly, because this is important to me. I come from a working family. We weren't wealthy people. My family, just from my grandmother, who nobody would let go to school, always believed in education and got lucky and landed in the only nursing school in the country that would allow Black women to become nurses. And I say this because it's really important, you know, that we think about these things. We need to create something significantly different than what is going on today. We are in the throes of a pandemic. I don't think that people truly recognize, who don't live in our communities, the depth of disruption that this pandemic has caused our families, our children, our single moms, many of them who didn't even have a computer in the home. Organizations like FJA and the National Council have had to stand in that gap. You talk about remote learning and you send children home to a house without internet because mom can't afford internet, sometimes without even electricity. So we have to really just think about, what does different look like? It's time for us to stop thinking that public safety equates with jails and prisons. It just doesn't. It just continues to cause a level of disruption in our communities that we have to move away from, and we have to invest our minds and our thinking and our money in creating thriving communities. And that includes the people that work in those prisons. That includes the people who work in those prisons. And I have spent the last 10 years moving around this country, talking to everybody from prison wardens to guards, to people who work as administration in prisons. Everything, to the incarcerated women in those prisons, to the people in the communities they come from. I've spent the last 10 years doing that. And I assure you, we are not doing this to take food off the tables of working families, of working people, of people who have jobs and security in those jobs. But we can actually create something different than going into a prison every single day, where the same incidents of alcoholism, substance use disorders, mental illness affect people who work in these environments as much as it affects those of us that had to endure living in those places. And we should really be thinking about that. How do we improve the quality of life for everybody? We're not trying to take food off the tables of these people who are working people, who are one paycheck away from poverty themselves. We're trying to bring us together as a commonwealth for the common good of everybody and get us all around the table to figure out what does different look like, and how do I get to still be in the position that I'm in, have a salary that I have, feed my children, send them to college, not be in jeopardy of losing all that. That's not our goal. Our goal is to create what different looks like, and that is inclusive of everybody. We know what it's like to be marginalized and left out. We're not trying to do that to anybody else.
Thank you so much for that, Andrea. Really powerful. We have time for a couple more questions. This one seems poignant in the moment. Many of my friends are feeling hopeless and disillusioned by the legislative process and horrified by the sheer scale of the prison industrial complex. As organizers, how do you nurture hope when you're in it for the long haul? And how do you spread hope to others?
I guess I can answer that one. Oh, did you want to go ahead?
No, I was just jumping in because I am an organizer. That's what I do. I'm an organizer. And so we have that's what reimagining communities is all about. We stopped waiting and we started using our precious resources, our tiny general operating budgets, to literally step out into our neighborhoods and create these pockets of model projects about what different looks like. And I think that that's important, because at some point you can't just keep waiting and hoping that people are going to catch on. I mean, and this is not anything but to say what the truth is. Our Black and Latino caucus that Rep. Tyler has tried to move this through didn't make the jail prison construction moratorium bill a priority. Why am I saying that? Because there is nothing more important, or at least a priority, for representatives that represent people in the most incarcerated corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that totally missed me of why they would not find this to be a priority that had needed to be with their other priorities. So we're not necessarily there. There's a lot of influence, power, and money that effectuates how things happen in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we just got to name that. So communities have to turn inward to begin the process of demonstrating what different looks like. And that's, the work that we do at FJ every single day in building with nothing, the different projects of what different looks like.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and say that, there are a lot of folks out there that are currently not even registered to vote or have no interest in the political process because they've been turned off by it for one reason or another. And it's up to us to make sure that they feel comfortable engaging in government, whatever that means to them, whether that be voting, whether that be calling their state rep, whether that be showing up to the state house, whatever that is. It's up to us to make sure that folks feel comfortable engaging in government, because in the end of the day, it makes for more fruitful discussion on the House floor, or we can create more fruitful bills to be able to address issues on a wider scale than if we don't have more hands on at the table or addressing the issue. And so I'd say education is the way we can be able to address that. And so I would encourage you all, if you know someone out there, or if you're, if you know someone that is just not the biggest voter, or just they don't care about the legislative process, do your best to educate them on the issue topic and hopefully get them there to be able to further engage with us. And then we can always schedule this conference call again or have more opportunities for folks to be able to engage with us. We're open doors. We have office hours. When a State House does open up again, you can literally walk into the building and speak to whoever you want. And so feel free to reach out to us if you want to continue to encourage folks to feel more comfortable engaging the government if they aren't at the moment.
And I'll just pile on and say, in terms of nurturing hope, an event like this does it for me. So many people signed up and united in the belief that we have to stop the construction of new and expanded prisons and jails. Like, that's it, right? There's some faith to be had right here in this group of people and in the organizers. And I will just say that the disillusionment of the legislative process is real. And I know as an organizer, which I was before entering the State House, I felt it. And I felt like I was pounding against, local, state, and national government and just demanding that they work in the best interest of everyone. And I used to teach lobbying, and I would say, you know what? You make a difference. People make a difference. People power moves government, entrenched government. And then when I got into office, I thought, oh, please God, let me have been right about this. Like, I wanted to believe that, in fact, individual and collective action matters. And I will tell you, it matters. This bill didn't move magically, right? It moved because people demanded that it move, that you're creating the social and political and intellectual conditions where this bill has momentum. And I think we just have to believe that. It's hard to believe when we're thinking about Beacon Hill. It's hard to believe when we're thinking about our town government or city council or the federal government, but it is absolutely true. An effective action like the campaign waged for this bill can make a difference. And I just want to say one more thing, which is that, in the beginning, we were talking about the victories that happened before I was in the State House. And the work doesn't stop. Right? The work doesn't stop to see those victories through, to see those policies implemented, because they won't be implemented without people power, to track the changes. And then, like, as Andrea is saying, to think about the new vision for what's needed in the Commonwealth. All of that is people powered and hopeful.
Thank you so much. Mahtowin, did you have your hand raised briefly?
Well, I would just add to that it's completely sensible to feel discouraged about the legislative process. That I think that's a sane response. It is so difficult to get legislation passed in Massachusetts, and it's so difficult to feel welcome within the system. We're on this panel right now. We have wonderful legislators who want people to feel welcome, but unfortunately, there are plenty of people at the State House, elected officials, who are not working on that. But what I would say is this, is that we don't have the option of giving up. Indigenous and Black communities have already seen the end of the world. We're already post-apocalyptic. We know what it is for everything to end for our people. We know what it is to suffer the most extreme oppression for a long time. And we don't have the luxury of giving up. So if anybody asking this question or thinking the question of, I feel discouraged, what do I do? You need to just keep working away at things and find like-minded people that you can work with so that you can build that kind of community if you don't have it already. I think that's really important. To keep our morale up and to keep moving forward in the face of very real obstacles.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. People are being so generous with their time. We're 5 minutes over. Well, the last few questions there were about how do we get involved? How do we make decarceration actually happen? And so the answers for that, no doubt, will be in the links that are being put for you in the chat. I want to thank our panelists so much for their time, energy, vulnerability, expertise, all being shared today. And thank each one of you who called, who put your time and effort in this space tonight, and who are going to continue calling and are going to continue volunteering and pushing for this bill. Thank you, everyone, so much. FreeHer.
Sitting down by the water.